I'm 29 years old now, and I've had my share of frightening experiences over the years. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever haunted me the way one particular night did when I was just 15 years old. It was my first real babysitting job, and I thought it would be the easiest money I'd ever make. The parents, Mark and Diane, were family friends. You know the kind, where everyone just assumes everything will be perfectly safe because your parents have known their parents for years. Their son Charlie was 5 years old, adorable and full of energy, the kind of kid who makes you smile just by being in the room. He seemed completely normal in every way. It was a quiet Friday night in early fall when my parents dropped me off at their house around 6:30 in the evening. Mark took me aside and went over the house rules with the kind of serious tone you'd expect from someone briefing a new employee at an office. He showed me where everything was, explained the bedtime routine, and then he said something that should have meant more to me than it did at the time. "The back door has 2 locks," he said, making direct eye contact with me. "Make sure you lock both of them, top and bottom." I nodded confidently, thinking to myself that a lock is just a lock, right? How complicated could it be? They left around 7 o'clock, and suddenly the house felt bigger and quieter than it had just moments before. Charlie and I spent the evening playing card games on the living room floor, laughing as he made up his own rules that made no sense. Then we switched to some harmless video game where the character couldn't even die, just bounced around collecting coins. Around 7:45, I heated up mac and cheese and chicken nuggets in the microwave, the classic babysitter dinner that never fails. By 9 o'clock, I had tucked Charlie into bed upstairs. His bedroom was at the end of a wide hallway, decorated with posters of dinosaurs and superheroes. The room had those sliding closet doors that always make a soft, rumbling sound when you open them. There was a tall laundry hamper in the corner near his dresser, and a soft yellow nightlight glowed from the wall outlet, casting gentle shadows across the room. Everything felt warm and safe and completely normal. I went down the hall to the guest room and turned on the TV, settling in to watch whatever was on. About 40 minutes passed, and I was starting to relax, thinking this was the easiest job in the world. Then I heard soft footsteps padding down the hallway. Charlie appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant tightly against his chest. His voice was barely a whisper when he said, "Chris, there's something in my closet." I gave him what I thought was a reassuring smile. "It's just the house settling, buddy. Old houses make weird noises sometimes." But he shook his head slowly, his eyes wide and serious. "No, it's scratched. I heard it scratching." I walked him back to his room, my hand on his small shoulder, trying to be the responsible adult he needed me to be. I opened the closet doors with confidence, pushed aside some hanging clothes, and looked into every corner. There was nothing there but shoes and toys and normal closet things. I closed the doors firmly and tucked him back into bed, smoothing his blanket and telling him everything was okay. 15 minutes later, I heard those footsteps again, a little faster this time. "Chris," he said from my doorway, his voice trembling. The closet door moved. It opened by itself. I sighed internally, thinking he was just having trouble settling down, but I walked back to his room with him anyway. And that's when my confidence started to crack. The closet door was standing completely open. Both sides slid all the way apart. My stomach dropped. I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed those doors. I had made sure they were shut tight. "Did you open it?" I asked him, even though I already knew the answer. He shook his head immediately, and the fear in his eyes was so raw and genuine that it sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a kid looking for attention. This was real fear. I closed the closet doors again, this time checking twice to make sure they were fully shut. I tucked him in once more, told him I was just down the hall if he needed me, and went back to the guest room. But this time I left both doors open so I could hear better. 10 minutes later, he called out again. Not screaming exactly, but his voice had a shaky quality that made my heart start racing. When I walked into his bedroom, he was sitting straight up in bed, tears streaming down his face. "What happened, Charlie? What's wrong?" He didn't answer me with words. He just raised one trembling hand and pointed toward the corner of his room, toward the space behind his tall laundry hamper. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. But then my eyes adjusted to the shadows and I saw it clearly. There was a man crouched behind the hamper, pressed into the narrow space between it and the wall. He was trying to make himself as small as possible, folding his body into that tiny corner. I saw his shoulder first, then his worn-out shoes, and then his eyes, staring directly at me with an expression I'll never be able to describe. Not angry, not panicked, just watching time seem to slow down completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but somehow I didn't scream. Some deep survival instinct took over, and I knew that screaming might make him move, might make him do something. I grabbed Charlie from his bed, lifting him up in one motion and back toward the door without ever breaking eye contact with the man in the corner. He didn't move. He just stayed there, crouched and watching, like he was waiting for me to make the first mistake. I ran to the guest room, slammed the door, locked it, and called 911 with shaking hands. "There's a man in the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's in the kid's bedroom. We're locked in the guest room. Please hurry." The police arrived incredibly fast, their sirens cutting through the quiet neighborhood. When they cleared the house, they found that the front door was standing wide open, something I hadn't even noticed in my panic. But what made my blood run cold was what they found at the back door. The bottom lock was engaged, just like I'd thought. But the deadbolt, the top lock that Mark had specifically told me to use, was not locked. And according to the police, that bottom lock could be popped open if someone jiggled the handle hard enough from the outside. It wasn't secure on its own, which meant the man had likely been inside the house long before Charlie and I ever realized. He might have been there when I was heating up dinner. He might have been there when we were playing games in the living room. He had been hiding and waiting, and we had no idea. I still think about one thing that keeps me awake some nights. If Charlie hadn't come to get me, if I had dismissed his fears and told him he was just imagining things, if I had ignored him or gotten annoyed at being interrupted, that night could have ended very, very differently. I never babysat again after that, and I never ever forget to lock both locks. This happened when I was 23, living in my first apartment alone in a city I'd just moved to for work. The building was old, built sometime in the 1920s, with high ceilings and creaky wooden floors that groaned under your feet no matter how carefully you walked. My apartment was on the third floor, number 3C, at the end of a long hallway that always seemed darker than it should be, even during the day. The landlord was an elderly man named Mr. Kowalski, who spoke with a thick accent and never quite made eye contact when he talked to you. When I signed the lease, he mentioned almost casually that the previous tenant had left in a hurry, but didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. I needed a place to live, and the rent was affordable. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. The apartment was small but cozy, with a living room that faced the street, a tiny kitchen, one bedroom, and a bathroom with original black and white tile. I worked long hours at my new job, so I was usually exhausted by the time I got home. I'd make dinner, watch something on my laptop, and fall asleep quickly. But then the dreams started. At first they were vague and unsettling, just a sense of being watched, of not being alone. But they gradually became more specific and more vivid. I would dream about a woman standing in the corner of my bedroom, wearing a long white dress that looked like it was from another era. She never moved, never spoke. She just stood there with her head tilted slightly to one side, her long dark hair hanging over her face so I couldn't see her features clearly. I'd wake up gasping, my heart pounding, and tell myself it was just stress from the new job, from being in a new city where I didn't know anyone. But the dreams kept coming, night after night, and they kept getting worse. Then one night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in my hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. I lived alone. There shouldn't have been anyone in my apartment. I lay frozen in my bed, barely breathing, listening to those footsteps move from one end of the short hallway to the other. Back and forth, back and forth. The old wooden floors creaked with each step, and I could track exactly where the person, or whatever it was moving.